All right, hello guys. How are you doing today? Uh, Good morning, good evening, or good night, depending on when are you watching this video. I'm broadcasting from my kitchen, as you can see, and this is the first of a series of videos that I'm planning to make to expose the class lectures instead of me actually going to class since we cannot right now. So. Um, I hope will be more or less the same experience and the same idea that I'm trying to convey, and that any questions or doubts, again, we are still available. All right, so we're gonna start our series of videos with a philosopher, which is Mr. Karl Marx. Now, this is the first of two videos, and I'm gonna use more or less the time that I think that the class will take, a normal session in class for a presentation, and I will stop the video more or less at the time of one class session, and so on and so forth. Okay, so today we are fast forwarding in time a little bit. Remember that last topic was Mr. Rene Descartes, and now we are going into Karl Marx. And that means that we are fast forwarding in time more or less 300 years in time. So we are more or less located in the 1800s, late 1800s in Europe. What was going on at that time? Well, industrial revolution. We had a new revolution in technology that allowed work to be done way more efficiently. That meant that companies were able to produce way more, and this brought a major change in social relations and in the way that workers and economy and all elements of society were related. And this is where Mr. Karl Marx comes in. Now, before we start with the class, I think most of you already know who Mr. Karl Marx is from your history classes. But what we're going to focus here in philosophy is not necessarily whether or not historically the ideas of Karl Marx actually worked in places like China, the Soviet Union, or Cuba, or the Cold War, or whatever, right? So where we're going to focus on is on the philosophical aspect of Mr. Karl Marx. And that basically, the fact that we are actually focusing on will be in the criticism that Mr. Karl Marx makes of capitalism. And how right was he in that criticism that he makes? So I start this presentation with this phrase, a specter is haunting Europe, which is how the manifesto of the Communist Party starts, which I hope you're already reading. Now, I'm going to be relating some of the ideas that we'll be seeing here in the presentation to that manifesto so that you can, if you haven't done your argument yet, you can start thinking of ideas on that, okay? All right, so that being said, let me start. Okay, so Mr. Karl Marx was born in Trier, Prussia, which is modern-day Germany, and he lived from 1818 to 1883. Now, from a very young age, Mr. Karl Marx was a political activist, and he was frequently criticizing the injustices of the Industrial Revolution and the effect it had in families and workers. And this led to him being exiled from Germany and having to flee to London just to escape persecution. And while he lived in London, he actually suffered from poverty himself. Um, I think four out of his seven children actually died from lack of proper medical treatment because he couldn't afford it. And he actually had a very precarious life. Now, this is where this other gentleman comes in, which is Frederick Engels. Now, Frederick Engels was another German, but he actually was pretty wealthy. He was the owner of a factory, and even though he was really wealthy, he thought that the ideas of Mr. Karl Marx were very true and very right. So what he did is that he helped Marx economically. He supported him so that he could continue writing, and he actually co-wrote it, the manifesto of the Communist Party with Marx. Now, if you want to see it like that, is in a way capitalism helped to finance or to support the creation of communist ideas. Now, the most important work of Mr. Karl Marx is Capital. That's the name of the work, a critique of political economy, or in the original German, Das Kapital. Okay, so some of the ideas that we'll be talking about here are both present in the Communist Manifesto, but mainly in one of the three volumes that we have of Capital, the work of Marx. Now, this you already know. After Marx wrote this and his ideas became this political and economic system that we know as communism, his ideas influenced other political and economic regimes in the 20th century, namely the Soviet Union, China, and Cuba, and all the other countries that were involved in this bilateral uh, section or era of the world, which is known as the Cold War. On one side, we had capitalism. On the other, we had communism and socialism. But again, as I said, we're not going to discuss that specifically. This is a consequence of Mr. Marx's thoughts. So we're going to focus more on the criticism that he made to capitalism itself. So the first idea that we are going to discuss is the idea of the struggle of classes. Now, Marx, one thing he understood and he pointed out is that throughout history, at whatever any given point in human history, there's always been the main characteristic of any point in human history is the existence of of an opposition of social classes, of oppressors and oppressed, of dominators and dominated. So, I mean, for example, in ancient Rome, we had the patricians and the Romans, and on the those were the oppressors, and the oppressed would be the slaves and all the other people who were conquered by the Romans. And in the Middle Ages, we had royalty, we had the feudal system, and we had the oppressed, the serfs, or the people who were dominated by kings. Now, in the time of the Industrial Revolution, Marx points out that this division of classes of oppressor and oppressed are characterized by the bourgeoisie, who are the oppressors, and the proletariat, who are being the oppressed. Who are the bourgeoisie? The owners of capital and the means of production. So basically, the owners of money and the owners of factories and of tools and of everything that is needed to actually produce anything. So those would be the bourgeoisie. Those will be the oppressors at that certain point in time. And who are the oppressed? The proletariat, the working class, people who have to sell their own work to make ends meet, to have any sort of income to survive. Okay, so this struggle of classes in modern times would be the bourgeoisie as the oppressors and the proletariat as the oppressed. Now, a thing that Marx points out is that this struggle of classes basically is determined by, in a certain point, the oppressed will rise up, rebel against the oppressors, and overthrow them, and then a new chapter in history is created. But again, this idea that history is sort of repeating itself over and over again, Marx determines this as a historical determinism. That means destiny of humanity is actually already written by this social class struggle. So he actually says, until we break with this vicious cycle, we break with this situation where there's oppressors and oppressed, we can actually call it history. Before that, it's only prehistory because we are not really creating anything new. So he believes that this determinism doesn't only determine history itself, but it determines the way that we think and the way that the role that we play in society. Marx believed that this social division was so engraved in our psyche that we most of the time we don't even realize that it exists, and uh, we actually will try to defend by any means possible that this is the best system that we have. So to illustrate this a little bit, the idea is capitalism, which is the main economic system that has been present since the time of Marx, is based on the idea of meritocracy. What is meritocracy? Well, basically a political and social system that has a basic premise. That is, the more you work, the more effort, the more reward, right? Okay, the more you put effort into something, the more you work, the more you actually prepare yourself and take advantage of opportunities, the best reward that you have, right? This is basically the idea, for example, of the United States as the land of opportunity, right? So here, I want to summarize this with a phrase that I frequently hear here at Tech, right? Which is this, right? I'm not going to do the accents. You already heard me do the accents, so I'm not going to do this in a video where I'll be recorded forever, but you already know it, okay? So basically, uh, this is the idea of capitalism, right? I mean, people are poor because they're not working hard enough. They are poor because they are not overcoming the circumstances that they have. They have the opportunity to do this, but they choose not to, right? So this is this is not surprising when we're talking about members of the bourgeoisie, right? So the bourgeoisie obviously thinks like this because it's convenient for them, right? So again, I'm not trying to convince uh, anyone here, you members of the bourgeoisie, that this is true. What is surprising for Marx is that the other members of society, the proletariat, will also buy into this idea of meritocracy when it's actually affecting them directly. So what we're trying to prove here, or what Marx is trying to say, is that this basic premise of capitalism, that is meritocracy, it's actually only a myth. It's the exception. It's not the rule. Okay, so I'm gonna try to illustrate this with a couple of current examples, right? So the idea is, well, how true really is this? Okay, how true is meritocracy? How true is that poor people are poor because they don't have enough efforts, or there's not enough work on their parts? Okay, well, I'm going to give two examples. All right, so the first example is talking about, well, how easy it is actually is to become rich under capitalism, or to stay rich once you already are wealthy. So it's commonly believed, or the story that capitalism will tell us, is that rich people are rich because of their talents, because of their work, because they are willing to take risks. Okay. However, new studies from institutions like Oxfam actually have found out that two-thirds of the rich, or the wealth of billionaires, are actually not based technically on work or in talent or in innovation or creativity, but actually from already being born into very rich families, or inheriting wealth, or monopolies, or just basically all the opportunities that being rich already brings up to you. Okay, so to to illustrate this, I want to show you a couple of videos. Okay, so I'm gonna share the screen. Let me just go here. Where are we? Okay, let me see. I'm still I'm still figuring this out. Okay, so let me see. Okay, I'm gonna share this. All right, so I'm gonna show you a video by BBC News about billionaires. So let's see. So to just share computer sound. Okay, ready? Here we go.
34 billion and 9 billion.
50 billion pounds.
Billionaires. Tens of billions.
A billion. What even is that?
At 100 billion here, 200 billion there.
We seem to have heard it a lot.
Billions and billions and billions of...
Just to be clear, that's a 1 and 9 zeros. But what does £1 billion actually look like? So, you've been visited by a fairy from the magic money tree, and she's given you the power to earn £1 a second. You'd have £1 million within 2 weeks. As for making your first billion, it would take nearly 32 years for that. If you'd rather visualise the difference, here's what £1 million would look like, stacked into £50 notes. And here it is, next to £1 billion stacked in the same way. Alright, let's put it into context. Take the UK's total government budget. In 2018, it was projected to be over £840 billion, with over £160 billion spent on health, £52 billion spent on defence, and the big one, £256 billion spent on welfare. Now, remember the magic money tree fairy? She's decided to give you some control over parts of the national budget pie. Choose wisely, you've got £1 billion to spend on each slice. Don't know where to start? Here's what £1 billion could get you. 2 flagship hospitals, or pay for 19,000 GPs' yearly salaries. What about just 2/3 of a nuclear-powered submarine? That's £1 billion. The annual salary of around 27,000 secondary school teachers. You could choose to electrify about 200 miles of train lines. That's £1 billion too. On a national scale, it might feel like £1 billion might not get you that far. So if you wanted to spend £1 billion on your own terms, 10 commercial spacecraft, 5 elite hotels, a few islands off the coast of Thailand, and throw in your very own Disneyland, why not? You'd still have heaps of cash left over. But take the average Brit. Let's say Jack earns around £16.50 an hour, and he works around 39 hours a week. He would have to clock in over 60 million hours of work to make £1 billion. That's nearly 7,000 years. In this nightmare maths problem, it was at one point taking Jeff Bezos around 35 seconds to make what Jack takes home every year. And it was taking Mark Zuckerberg about 1.5 minutes to do the same.
Okay, so the important thing that I want to take from this video is the idea that, well, once you are a billionaire, a billion in terms of money is just an insane amount. And being a billionaire is what capitalism is all about, right? The problem is that, well, once you're a billionaire, it's way easier to become even more rich. And any average worker, doesn't matter how much they work, and never will be the same way to achieve the same amount of wealth. Okay, so once you are a billionaire, once you are rich already, it's way easier just to maintain or just to keep being rich or become even richer than starting from the bottom and actually working your way up. Okay, now that idea of working yourself up in socioeconomic class is measured by an indicator called social mobility. Now, social mobility basically measures the capacity that any given country has, or the population of any given country has, to move upwards in a social scale. So in this infographic, we say, like, in countries like Denmark, 25 out of 100 people will not be able to get out of the poorest population. Okay, so that's 25 out of 100. Okay, but in countries like the United States, that number goes up to 42 out of 100. So at any given year, out of 100 people who are poor, 42 will remain poor and will not be able to overcome their socioeconomic condition. But in countries like Mexico, this indicator goes way up. That is 70 out of 100 people of the poorest population will not be able to get out of it. Okay, so this means that it doesn't really matter in terms of merits or efforts. Okay? It's just the economy works in a way in which uh, the rich stay rich and the poor, is very difficult for them in certain places in the world to actually uh, get out of, of that poverty. And to illustrate this a little bit further, I also wanted to show you this, which is the Social Mobility Index. This is an index that is done every year by the World Economic Forum, and basically it ranks countries according to their social mobility. Now, this is, I think, around 98 or 100 countries. This is, here it is, 82. Okay, so out of 82 countries, where do you think Mexico is ranking? Well, let's see. So number one is Denmark with an 85.2 value. So let's scroll down, shall we? Okay, so let's see. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Number 58. 58 out of 82, and we are just under Armenia and Ecuador and just above Sri Lanka. So at a score of 52. Now, let's see. Let's see the individual indicators. So our overall score ranks us at 58. Now, are the other indicators that it takes into account: health, education, technology, work, and resilience and institutions. So, for example, in terms of health, well, not that bad, but also not that good, 61. Okay, education access, 62. Okay, well, not bad. The problem is when we actually see the next indicator, which is education quality and equity. So even though okay, we have a score of 62 and access to education, well, how good is actually that education? Well, not that good, right? Okay, this is lifelong learning, technology access, 66. Now, this is also a very revealing fact. Look, so this indicator is work opportunities, and we have a score of 74, which is pretty good, right? And this actually illustrates, for example, Mexico's unemployment rates. Do you know what Mexico's unemployment rate is right now? I don't have the exact number, but it's pretty low. It's basically around 3.8%. That means that out of the total population that could be working and looking for jobs, only 3.8 are unemployed. Well, that's not bad, is it? Well, the problem is not how many people are actually employed, but the next indicator, fair wage distribution. Okay, and there we rank at 37. So even though there's a lot of people working, well, how much are they actually earning? Not that good, right? Okay, so working conditions, 47, social protection, 48, and inclusive institutions, 47. All right, so this more or less paints a picture on how this idea of meritocracy and social mobility and all of the other things that capitalism is trying to sell us, well, it's really not that true, or is it? Okay, so here we start um, questioning, questioning all this idea. Okay, so again, we all have this story of success, right? You could say my grandparents or my parents started really low, started really poor, and they worked their way up, and that's a story of success, and that's a proof that the system actually works. Well, I mean, good. Congratulations to you or to your grandparents or to whomever you know that could actually do it. But that same story, is it the rule or is it the exception? In countries like Mexico, it seems to be the exception. And Are we basing a whole economic and political system in exceptions, not in rules? Well, okay, so this is the idea that Marx is talking about, okay? How capitalism is not what it seems. Okay, so another criticism that Marx makes is that capitalism has turned economy and money into an ideology. Now, to illustrate this, what I wanted to ask you is, well, could you imagine that the world is invaded by aliens and all the human race is destroyed and civilization as we know it ends? You could, right? I mean, it's easy to imagine that. Could you imagine that? I don't know. This world pandemic turns in people into zombies, and all society falls apart, and social order just becomes um, something completely different. You could, right? Now, could you imagine a world without money? It's not as easy, is it? And that's what Marx means. Money has become the center of our ideology and the center of our society and of our value system. Okay, so it's easier for us to imagine a world order being totally different for other factors other than the disappearance of money, right? So economy has created this ideology in which money is a necessary aspect of existence, right? So, but first of all, I mean, what is an ideology in the first place? Well, an ideology is defined as a set of normative beliefs, conscious and unconscious ideas that an individual, group, or society has. Well, in a few words, basically means an ideology is the rules of what is normal and abnormal, what is right and what is wrong, what is accepted and not accepted. Okay, so money in itself and the economy has become an ideology in our modern society, and that means money has become uh, the main goal for many things, the center of our social activities, and the determinant rule of what is right and what is wrong. And if you want to think about it like this, is well, how many of how many aspects of your life are actually determined by money? Well, pretty much everything, right? So things like where do you want to live? What do you want to study? What do you want to do for a living? Who do you want to marry? How many children are you planning on having, right? All these things are determined in a way by money. Okay? So money is always in the center of all of our social interactions, and that's in a way, okay, is what Marx is trying to criticize. Okay, we're giving money all this power over our own lives. So he makes this whole analysis and criticism of money as an ideology, but we in class, we're going to focus only on four things, okay? We're going to focus on four main criticisms, which are things that this ideology of money affects mostly the members who don't have it, okay? So this ideology of money basically is, well, if you have money, then you're good, okay? Everything is good for you. Okay, you're successful, you're powerful, you can bend the rules to your own will. Okay, but those who don't have it, well, they're the ones who suffer. Okay, so we're going to analyze this four aspects of the unfairness of the ideology of money: alienation, the unfairness of profits, unfair working conditions, and what Marx calls commodity fetishism. Okay. So in this video, we're only going to get to alienation, and we'll see the other three in the next one, okay? So the first idea is the idea of alienation. In German, Entfremdung. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly. You guys know German? I don't. But alienation, basically the definition of alienation as a concept is a feeling of isolation from a group or an activity to which one should belong or in which one should be involved. All right. So basically, it means feeling separated from something that should be a part of you. Okay. This dissociation of your own character. Right. So Marx points out that workers under industrial revolution and under capitalist production are always being alienated. Why? Well, let's see. Okay, so we have a basic worker of any factory, right? That since the Industrial Revolution, basically are what they're doing is they're part of a process, and they're operating maybe a machine or any sort of part of the process to produce something else, right? So back since the main uh, concept of capitalism and Adam Smith and his book The Wealth of Nations, basically capitalism is based in the idea of specialization. What does this mean? Well, that instead of one person spending a certain amount of time to produce something, let's say a chair, uh, and it takes, I don't know, 4 hours to make a chair. Instead of that, what you can do is you can employ 10 people, and one person will be doing just one part of the process of building a chair over and over again, and it will take the same 4 hours, but you will produce way more chairs, right? The problem is that each person is only focusing on one small part of that production process. And the negative consequence of that is that we are separating workers from a bunch of things. Okay, we're alienating workers from several things. So first of all, we're alienating workers from the product of their work. So first of all, if you build a chair from scratch, you went through all the process, and at the end you have a product that you made. But if all you do all day, every day is turn a screw, okay, or pull a lever, or answer a phone, or do something that is not part of the whole process, then you're being alienated from the final products. Okay, you're just a small little aspect of that product. It's not yours. Okay, so you're also alienated from the act of producing, because again, you're only doing one small part. That is, it, it can be done by anyone in the same way, and you're not putting any of you into that. If you're creating a chair from scratch, you decided the design, you decided the materials, you worked on them, and you have a final product. But if you only doing one small part of it, then anyone can do that. It takes no talent. It takes no specific part of you. Okay? It can be done by anyone, like you were a machine, right? It alienates the worker of himself as a producer, again, because the final work is not his, and this alienates him also from other workers, because basically we're doing every day is a repeating process of just doing the same thing over and over again without any sort of human interaction or anything. Okay, so to illustrate this in a way is I'm going to use a personal example. Okay, so one of my first jobs was as a working in a call center, where I used a microphone like this, and all I did is sit down and answer a phone, okay, for hours at a time. And a call came in, and I answered it in the same way, and I had to go through a script and say the same thing over and over again all day, every day. And actually, I mean, not to diss anyone's job or anything, but it was awful. Okay, it was just absolutely awful, because basically there was no way to imprint any part of me into that job. Okay, anyone could do it. I could be fired anytime and replaced. Okay, they didn't allow to put any creativity into my job, And I wasn't even allowed to talk to other people because that would distract me from doing my job as efficiently as possible. So basically, this idea of alienation is that this idea of especialization, of just putting someone to a specific job to in order to produce more, causes workers to be considered machines, to be dependable, to be just mere tools for production instead of human beings. So an example of this, I want to illustrate how this actually works. Well, this is a chart that shows labor productivity in different parts of the world measured by the GDP per hour of work in the economy. And this was done in 2017. Okay, so for example, in Ireland, the average hours of any particular worker is 1,700 hours per year. And their productivity is 99.5. So they're really efficient. Okay. So this starts to go up, and we found ourselves in Mexico, which is almost double what Ireland works. Okay. And we are way less productive. So why? Well, there's a bunch of reasons, but the idea here is another myth of capitalism is, well, the more you work, the more productive you become. And this is not true always or for everyone. Okay, so if you have a low paying job in which you go to work for a bunch of hours every day, you spend a bunch of hours traveling to and fro to work. Okay, so what's left for you? How do you imprint anything else into your work? How are you being happy? And that's what alienation is all about. Okay, alienation basically is considering a human being not as a human, but just as a means to make money. And that's what gives it worth. Okay, and it is part of the ideology of money. Okay, you are what you do, you are what you produce. Okay, so eventually, in a capitalist system where you're working all day, every day, and even on the weekends or whatever, your life turns into something very isolated from your humanity. Okay, so if you're basically spending all your time either working or traveling to work or just being too tired to do anything else, when do you have time to do all the other things that make us human? Okay? What is the purpose of your work? Okay, what is the purpose of you? When do you have time to spend with your family, to play, to enjoy life, to be human? Okay, so this alienation, it doesn't only apply for workers. This feeling of disconnection or loss of meaning when human beings become this mechanicistic part of society, it actually affects anyone under the capitalist system. And an example that I could give to you that I think you will relate very good with that is grades. So you're always complaining that you have a bunch of work to do, that all professors are just throwing all these homeworks and projects and everything at you, and you are spending a certain class doing the work of the next class and so on and so forth, just producing work in school. So I ask you, when are you learning? What are you doing this for? Hey, when are you enjoying your time as young people? And this is supposed to be the best time of your life. Hey, why are you, what are you? Are you humans or are you just machines that are designed to make work and produce good grades? I bet some of you have felt like that sometime during your academic careers, right? So it's the same idea. At the end, I mean, even though we're not talking about money, we're talking about production. Okay? Human beings are not valued as humans. They are valued as means to produce something good, something that is merit, something that is competition, and that is better than the others. Okay, so this is at the end alienating us of our work of our purpose and of our humanity in general. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the video here, just because this is more or less the time that we'll have for a session. So next video that I will do, we'll go into the other three aspects that we're gonna analyze of Marx. And remember that the presentation is in Blackboard, and at the end of the presentation, there's the resources that we've been seeing so that you can use that for your arguments and the dialogue, all right? So thank you for your attention, and I'll see you soon, okay? Bye.